Välkommen på Mixed Mental Arts. Vi har med Martin Totland. Anyway, that's the extent of my Swedish at this point. But no, we're here with Martin Totland and Cate Fogarty. Martin wrote the first Culture Matters piece, breaking down Scandinavian culture and just all about how, even though we think of the Vikings as something long past, many of the environments in which the Vikings operated culturally and in terms of their survival still shape Scandinavian thought and Scandinavian culture.
That's right.
And then that inspired a few other people in the community, Merritt Boxler to write up about the Swiss. Mitch Evers wrote up about my own half people, the Dutch, and then I read that in a terrible Dutch accent that everybody hated. And then Anthony Sadibo Falati wrote up about Botho, the culture of Botswana. So, but I think that actually it'd be really, really good. Martin happens to be in LA, and I thought it'd be really good to sort of talk about both that Culture Matters piece, and then also I think part of what's really interesting is the way in which Sweden and Norway are used as political tools in the American political dialogue. What?
Yeah.
Because always for liberals, it's, you know, why can't we just be like Sweden and Norway? And then for conservatives, it's like Sweden and Norway, blah, 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 blah. And I mean, you see this, I was thinking about this on the way over, you see the same thing with the US all over the world. Like the US is used as a political tool for whatever local political battle that people are having.
Yeah.
So there's, I think, nobody better to talk about that with than Martin. And then, of course, Cate, being secretly Swedish and from Minnesota, and also having lived in Norway for a while. So it's just a really good opportunity for all of us to talk about what we've noticed about each other's cultures and about our own culture.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So your mom is Swedish.
Yeah, my mother is from a smaller town in Sweden called Karlstad, southern Sweden, right on the northern edge of the Lake Vänern, the biggest lake in Sweden. It's about 3 hours east of Oslo. So it's, you know, pretty easy drive. If you're in Norway, you want to go across. That's where she's from. And my father, he was from Bergen, which is where I grew up.
And then let's just even talk about lines on a map, right? Because, you know, even the idea of sort of Sweden or Norway, right? These are pretty modern inventions, right? Like there's, you know, at various points, things have been divvied up in different ways.
Norway's been in a union with Sweden, which was dissolved in 1905. For hundreds of years, we were under Denmark. So it's all, historically, it all blends together in a way. And outsiders might look at Norway, Sweden, and Denmark as pretty similar. I think you have to spend a lot of time there to start noticing, or be from one of those countries to notice the differences.
And even linguistically, right? Like there's these sort of tidy lines of Norwegian and Swedish and Denmark. And you can definitely tell the difference between these languages, but there's a process of sort of standardization and like...
Yeah, we have the same alphabets pretty much. You know, the Swedish one is just a tiny bit different in terms of just a few, I don't know, the term for just how the letters are formed. You know, the Swedish people use umlauts in some of their letters. We have a line through the O instead of 2 umlauts above it. Things like that. But yeah, I mean, if you're from Norway or Sweden or Denmark, you can all read each other's language and understand people when they speak, so...
But then Danish has all those amazing sort of glottal stops where they're like...
The joke in Scandinavia is that all Danes sound like they're talking with a hot potato lodged in their throat.
Well, unfortunately, you're not at all Danish, so you can say that.
Thankfully. I can and I will.
Yeah, good. So yeah, so tell us a little bit about this, you know, this Culture Matters piece that you wrote up.
Yeah. It's the first one for Mixed Mental Arts, and the idea was to break down... Scandinavian culture, especially Norwegian and Swedish, being where I'm from. And since I've also lived in the United States for, you know, not consecutively, but a total of 7 years now, I thought I had a pretty good perspective of the differences between the US and Scandinavia. And particularly when it comes to the difference between, when it comes to how American society is very individualistic or atomistic, as you would say, and Norway and Sweden being very holistic. We think about the community before we think about ourselves in many ways. So the idea was to try to break that down as clearly as possible and give concrete examples and talk a little bit about why I myself moved to the United States in the first place and why I like it here, and try to bring parts of US culture with me back to Norway and Scandinavian culture with me when I go to the US.
Yeah, because a lot of people are, I mean, my own dad, right? Holland also very much has that sense of like, hey, fuckers, be part of the community.
Yeah.
Like, you know, we got to like pull together here. And, you know, and there's a saying in Dutch that actually Mitch used in his piece.
Yeah.
Hek is genoeg. What is it? Normaal is hek genoeg, which is normal is crazy enough. Like you just being normal is enough craziness. Like don't try and be anything outside of that.
Right. Yeah.
And so it is very much sort of that similar attitude to Lagom or Jante.
Yeah. So that mirrors a Norwegian idea, cultural idea called Janteloven pretty closely. And Janteloven is this idea that you should never try to stick out too much, never make anything much of yourself in polite society, as it were, out among people. Try to kind of minimize your idiosyncrasies and don't think you're above anyone else.
I remember when I was in, I can't remember if it was in Denmark or Sweden or Norway. But
it's all the same, doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's all the same. But I started brushing my teeth on a train platform. And it did not make people comfortable at all. Like this
what
was
were you
really
thinking?
Well, in general, I do odd things, but this
guy must be American.
Yeah, no, and I mean it was like amazing, like just simply doing that sort of bathroom function in the not
view
normal
of
context.
others.
Yeah, it was like it was not okay.
Nope.
It was
Although I will say, walking through Oslo in the winter, you see a lot of dudes farmer blow.
Oh yeah.
Street. Like that's really
true.
normal.
Yeah, that's a literal translation of bondesniet, which means the farmer's way to blow your nose. So in lieu of a handkerchief, you just onto the grass and you wipe your nose with your sleeve and carry on with your work.
Yeah, well, that's good. I've done the farmer's blow.
Yeah,
I don't have a problem with that. But so Janteloven, and that comes from a Danish writer, right? Originally, I think?
Norwegian writer. Yeah, so his name is Aksel Sandemusa.
Yeah,
and he wrote a book. The English title is "A Stranger Covers His Path" or "Covers His Tracks," I believe. I don't remember the exact year that it came out, but the book is about a fictional, sort of an amalgam of a town, like just the archetypal Norwegian small town. And in this book, he talks about how the residents of this town follow or adhere to this idea of Janteloven, or the law of Jante. And it's a set of 10 rules or guidelines where you're not the first one and the most critical one, which is one most people refer to when they talk about the law of Jante, is don't think you're anything special. And then number 2 is you should never consider yourself better than anyone else. And it goes on like
these
that.
These are the ideas that are the most antithetical to everything American.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Like,
the inverse here would be like, you're special.
Yeah.
You are amazing. You can do anything you set your mind to.
And you better make something of yourself, and you'd better stand out. And
exactly.
Better, and so,
exactly. And so that that book talks about, or it kind of discusses those ideas, how these residents try to follow, or how they live by this set of guidelines unconsciously, I think. But then how it also leads to people talking behind each other's backs because they feel like they can't air grievances in public. They can't actually express truly who they feel like they are inside, and things like that. And then after the book was published, in some later added author's notes, the author, Aksel Sandemusa, he said that he had gotten a lot of reactions from readers who were convinced that the book was specifically about the town that they were actually from. Yeah. So, and he had also said that the book is not about any specific town in Norway. It's not a pseudonym or anything like that, like a indirect reference to an actual town, but he had just taken the ideas that were prevalent in Norwegian society already and wrote it down.
Yeah, it's very much, as you talk about this, it reminds me of, what is it, Yonka Fatwa County or whatever. Who was it? This is American writer William Faulkner. Yeah, so he has this, all of his books are set in this hypothetical county in Mississippi.
Yeah.
And the point is it is just like, yeah, this represents Mississippi, but it's not supposed to be about like any specific place. It is just about like the core ideas that repeat.
Yeah.
By the way, that's some approximation of the name of the county, but I don't actually remember what it is.
Right.
But yeah, so I think, I mean, even like that's what's interesting hearing you talk about this, because it's my dad, very much like you, like he felt very strongly that sort of like sense to conform. We don't really get to stand out.
He grew up in Holland?
He grew up in Holland. He grew up in Arnhem. And he was very clear from a young age that he didn't really care where he went. He just wanted out. He wanted away. And he wanted somewhere where he could stand out and he could be different and he could do all of that stuff.
It's very similar to the sense I had when I was 15 and I first came to the US after I was finished with 10th grade in Norway, which is the end of what we would call high school. I was fed up to here with everything Norwegian society and school and everything. And it's one of the main reasons I went to LA County as an exchange student, my first introduction to America.
Yep. Yeah. Which is about as different as you can get.
Yes.
And I'm sure felt like a breath of fresh air for you.
A breath of smog-filled air.
Yeah. There you go. Good.
But fresh nonetheless.
Yeah. And, so, and then, just to sort of talk about, how that all ties in here. So the other big part of the sort of Swedish-Norwegian experience was that there was these big famines. And there's the series of novels about, I think it's a Swedish novelist, about like the famine and then all of these generations of migrants that fled. Do you know what I'm talking about? There's a Swede I know, and they're like some of his favorite books.
No, he's a playwright.
Yeah. Oh. No, it's anyway, there's a series of novels, but the point is that during this period, there was like 1 million people who fled Sweden. Yeah. And they went to places like Minnesota.
Yeah. And also that, about 100 years ago, something like 800,000 Norwegians fled Norway, and most of them settled in the Midwest, Montana, Minnesota, those areas. Yeah.
And so that even though, Cate has learned Norwegian as a second language, right, that many of those cultural values persisted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like, so Lutheran churches, the Norwegian Swedish church, all brown, beige, everything. Like
drab, boring.
like the opposite of a Catholic church.
Yeah.
Like no sometimes a little bit of stained glass, but like they could just be blended into the background.
Yeah.
Just like a lot of the people.
Yep.
And the food.
And also that's part of the goal. Part of the goal is to blend into the background, right?
Yeah. I mean, my grandma, she used to say she was 100% Swedish. I got my DNA done. That's probably not 100% true.
Yeah.
but she, like, if anybody tried to like stand out or thought that they were better, she was just right there, like with her acid tongue or something. I don't know. But very nice.
Yeah. And that behavior, was once a survival issue, right? Like,
that's true. It relates to the Swedish idea or the Swedish concept of lagom, which is the idea that nothing you do should be to excess. Everything in moderation, just exactly what you need, nothing less, nothing more. Take what you need and then pass it on to the next guy, because the term lagom comes from it's a contraction of the saying laget which means around the team. And it comes from the Viking era, actually, when teams or groups of Vikings, not teams, but groups of Vikings had a horn of mead or beer. And as you passed it around, everybody drank just enough of it so that there was enough for it to go around the entire group of people. So lagetum around the group so that everybody gets their fair share. And
also because, so much of this is just the raw environment of Scandinavia, right? Like, it's not like you're living in the tropics and there's just mangoes fucking falling off the trees all the time.
No, exactly. Yeah. It's all, back in the day, it was a hard scrabble existence, especially the further back you go, the tougher it was. But Norway's a big country with relatively big, with a lot of mountain ranges and long coastlines, but only something like 10%-ish of Norwegian land is able to be used for farming. So even though you have a big plot of land, there's no guarantee that you can do anything useful with it.
Yeah, and so you go through enough of those brutal winters, you go through enough shortages and all that sort of stuff. And
you have to rely on people around you to make it through hard winters. You know, it gets brutally cold up there. And back in the day, if you didn't have, any sort of modern luxuries, making it on your own would be extremely difficult.
Well, and you also don't have refrigeration, right? And I mean, one of the things that, when I was in Scandinavia, one of the things that really struck me was all the different grades of salted fish, right?
Oh, yeah.
There's like, you
got to preserve food,
There's all the different ones.
Clip fish.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And so talk to us about some of the different like preservation techniques for this fish, right?
You've actually hit upon my specialty. No. It's just, I think it's a holdover from just the times where you had to prepare food in a way where it would last you a very long time. Growing up, I was used to eating just potatoes, fish, and an assortment of few vegetables, a lot. That was a mainstay of the Norwegian diet growing up for, I think, most generations, mine and older. It's getting more varied now that, newer generations are out seeing more of the world and we're bringing more cuisine back with us. But yeah, growing up, it's just, you live on potatoes and fish and a few kinds of meat and peas and carrots, and that's about it. And you gotta prepare or preserve it in a way that it's going to last you a long time. And salted, dried, cured fish is definitely a huge part
and
of
then
that.
Also just like leaving it on racks in the fucking Arctic tundra, right, to dry out. And one of the things, because you're from Bergen, and there's that great Hanseatic League museum right on the water.
Exactly. And it might, to most Americans, probably an obscure concept or ideas, but there was something called the Hanseatic League, which was a network of port cities in Europe that were connected through trade. And the big trade was in fish, especially. And out of Bergen, it was the main trading port for salted and cured fish, which was a trading league that lasted for something like 400 or 500 years, for a very long time, especially with connections to Holland and Germany, Denmark, and it might have been parts of England too, if I'm not mistaken. And this is an enormous cultural influence on Bergen. And, right in the heart of Bergen, there's the Hanseatic Museum, which details this history. You've been there as well.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's actually one of my favorite museums in the world. It's like this weird hidden gem, and you're just like, ooh, this is.
And you get to walk through buildings that are, 600 to, almost 1,000 years old, some parts of them, and very well preserved. Some parts of it are restored, of course, but they do a very good job of keeping it up to, or keeping it very close to the way it was. Yep. And you learn about the history of, basically the fish trade throughout Europe. And it was something that was crucial for, what would you call it? Idea sex between the cities, I'm sure.
Well, absolutely.
But also relying on the few things that we had to survive in terms of food.
Yeah, well, and also this, Mark Kurlansky does a good job of this in both cod and salt, but fish that can really be preserved and is a reliable source of calories, if crops fail, if whatever it may be. But I think, I think the point to make clear is that all of this stuff was about survival. It was about what made sense in that particular environment. Also, we're talking about this in sort of terms of modern categories, right? Yeah. But it ultimately isn't really shaped by like being Sweden or Norway or Denmark or Holland, but there are these regions that have these sort of environmental similarities.
Yeah. That kind of forces similarities in, cultural consciousness and how it trickles down to the individual.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then, we're lucky enough to live in the 21st century where we can see, we're not, if you grew up in whatever this town is, this fictional town, right? Whether it's, a fictional county in Mississippi or whether it's a fictional town in Scandinavia, you might feel whatever those frustrations are, but you didn't have the option of going somewhere else that was sort of the mirror image of your town.
Right.
And now we have the ability, my dad could flee Holland.
Yeah.
And, you know, you could flee Norway and come to LA, right?
Yeah.
And in many senses, I think, Cate, part of, you know, you went to Norway and you were in many senses fleeing America for a different experience. So what attracted you about?
Well, so many things. I mean, there's a lot of similarities, but also like the differences are so like they're subtle but really important. So the level of anxiety in the society, America is like up here.
Yeah.
And then like Norway is down here. Like I just felt like people were so much more relaxed and just chilled out. I mean, they're constantly talking about their stress level, which was really funny. They're always like, ikke no stress. No stress, no stress. And I was just like, you guys are not stressed. Like, you're cool.
Yeah.
You get 5 weeks of vacation. Yeah. And like, I think we were talking on the Facebook page a little bit about like one campaign that I thought really demonstrated it was their seatbelt campaign. So in America, we have all these signs that say click it or ticket.
Yeah.
Like with a cop and
If
like
you don't wear a
whatever.
seatbelt, we're going to find the shit out of you.
And in Norway, it's like somebody hugging somebody from behind. And it's like, we love you so much. We want you to
please
live.
think you're family.
Yes,
Sorry,
yeah.
One of the images they put up on billboards along the roads, especially dangerous ones. I remember seeing a big black and white photo on a billboard, and it's a man in a white sweater, grown man, and then his son is behind him wearing a black sweater, and he has his arm, the son has his arm draped across the father's chest to make it look like he's wearing a seatbelt. And it just says something like, think about your loved ones, or something to that effect.
Yeah.
This is a very, very incisive, or not incisive, but demonstrates the cultural mindset of how we approach this. Think about your safety, don't worry about a ticket.
Yeah.
Yeah, here in the U.S., it's like, you got to worry about a fine we're going to give you if you
this is going to cut into your budget, your bottom line. That's right. Yeah, exactly. And you will have broken laws, and you will be an offender. Yeah. So, you know, these basic, you know, these very old psychological mindsets that made sense in one environment are still very much shaping how we're doing things today. Yeah. And I think that, you know, just as the Hanseatic League made sense if you're, you know, pre-refrigeration and, you know, you're trying to find a commodity that you can move, and it made sense to be a Viking, you know, and sort of have this mindset. Now we sort of have to really intentionally create a culture that makes sense for this environment of the 21st century and this set of technology.
Right.
And, you know, I think the job of mixed mental arts is really just to like help midwife that conversation and facilitate it so that we have better and better tools for understanding each other's cultural differences. And then we can, you know, be intentional about choosing what bits we like from various cultures to evolve our own cultural toolkit. So for example, Brian's wife became obsessed with that book, Hygge.
About the Danish concept of hygge. Yeah.
So tell us about Hygge.
So in the American press, it's talked about as a Danish concept, but I think it's very much a Scandinavian one.
It's also a Dutch and German concept as well.
Yeah. But so in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, it would be the same word, hygge, Hygge. And it's just, it's a term for how to survive the winter, basically. So how to make yourself comfortable and cozy and make sure you survive the harsh months of the year. Staying inside, eating comfort foods, hanging out with friends, and just doing things that kind of fosters a sense of community and safety instead of being outside and braving the cold winter winds.
Yep.
I mean, and when you go there, like you feel it. Like there's candles everywhere. People still sit outside with blankets. And like it's just, I lived in Alaska and Anchorage, which is the same parallel as Oslo. Yeah. Totally different world.
Oh, yeah.
Like the darkness in Anchorage for me was like a lot more depressing than, I mean, it gets sad in Norway,
it can be a lot.
but it's still fun. Like people are doing fun things and they're out skiing and doing different things. And
the idea is to foster like a sense of, sounds cutesy, but like a cozy sense of community.
Kushli.
Kusli.
Yeah,
exactly right. So that's a Norwegian term for cozy. Yeah.
The Dutch call it gezellig.
Gezellig.
Gezellig. And then the German term is Gemütlichkeit.
Gemütlichkeit, yeah.
But they're all very much the same concept. And, you know, the guy who wrote the book, Hugo, makes the point that there are actually differences between them. There are subtle variations in terms of their focuses.
Right.
So, you know, I think
there are very underlying similarities between all of them.
But there are a lot of underlying similarities. And obviously a lot of it, again, is shaped by the environment in which those cultures evolved. And it's always like, it's for me, like, my dad has always been obsessed with harmoniousness. Like, and he would just always talk about fucking how we all needed to be fucking harmonious. Like, everybody needs to be fucking harmonious right now. And
or else.
And I was like, what the fuck is this? And then he had this other weird obsession with New Year's. Like, New Year's Eve was like a big deal.
Like celebrating.
It needed to be super special. There needed to be fucking candles.
Fireworks.
There needed to be, you know, like all these things and special dishes and all that sort of stuff. And it took me a long time to understand is like, oh, what he wants is gezellig. Like, that's what he's trying to achieve.
Oh, interesting.
And then he's just sort of, you know, taken this concept that he takes for granted because that's where he grew up. And even though he has very mixed and negative feelings about Holland, like there is this thing that he really appreciates from his childhood.
Still part of him.
That is
no matter
huge
what.
Part,
Right. And you mentioned he was obsessed with the idea of celebrating New Year's properly, and we do that in Norway too. I don't think Americans make much out of New Year compared to Scandinavia
in a different way.
Least.
In a different way. Yeah.
But here, or in Norway, sorry, not here, but in Norway, I was just recently celebrating New Year's back there, and you have a saying that you'll say to friends and strangers alike, and it's "Takk for det gamla." And it means thanks for the old, like thank you for the year that passed and everything that we accomplished in it. And the idea is to kind of thank everybody for their contribution to the community. Yeah. I mean, of course, it's more common to say it to your family, friends, loved ones, but you can in practice say to just about anybody.
That is definitely not how New Year's is celebrated in America.
No.
It's, you get fucking wasted. You go out. You wear stupid glasses that you know have some sort of shiny thing.
Yeah,
and then you're sad if you don't have someone to kiss at midnight.
Yeah.
And maybe you sing "Old Lang Syne," which I think is the best part of New Year's for me is "Old Lang Syne." But but you know they're very, very different. Even though nominally, yes, we both have New Year's, they're experienced very differently. And like, you know, I didn't grow up in Holland, so, you know, but for my dad, it seemed to always be about like having like intimate family dinner. Yeah. And then preferably with some sort of special show or something like that. But the
special show in what sense?
But this is not a red light district thing, I promise, guys. No, but there's the part of where Hugo and gezellig differ, I think, is that one of the things that the guy who wrote Hugo talks about is that like Hugo has to be indoors, whereas gezellig is something that you can have out of the home, where you can go to a nice restaurant and it can be gezellig and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
So, you know, in terms of like satisfying my dad's neurosis about New Year's, which we actively have to do every year, it's like, oh, is there some sort of restaurant that's doing a special dinner with like musicians performing things, and there's maybe some sort of traditional dance, but like what we're trying to do is satisfy this cultural concept that we don't really understand, but if we don't get it right, we're all going to pay for it because we haven't been fucking harmonious.
When your father talks about it being harmonious, it's just, can you it's expound on that?
We're together. There's a coziness going on. We're really like a bonded family unit. Right. And we are just fucking having a great time. Is everyone
is it in a way, whether you like it or not, you're going to participate in this?
Yeah. You know, and it's like that's a real, and I've actually noticed this, and I think this is more of a Germanic thing than a Scandinavian thing, because there's a family I know, and the dad is German, and it's the same thing. Like he has this real need for fucking family time. Like, we're gonna have family time now, and we're gonna have like this tight sense of unity and being together and being in a community.
Yeah.
But again, like, I think this is sort of, you know, this sort of draws out like the ways in which we actually experience culture, right? Because my knowledge of Dutch culture is all very third hand, right? Like I never lived in Holland. My dad never spoke Dutch to me as a kid because he thought it was a worthless language. He was like, why the fuck would you learn Dutch? Everybody speaks English. Like, you know, there's no real point.
It's a cool language though.
Listen, I took it in college. I picked it up various points and but you know, it's again, like this is a reflection of his own emotional feelings about Holland and about all of that. And, you know, I think that in practice, in the same way that, you know, I mean, you have this appreciation for America, but you now live in Bergen.
Yeah, I do.
And, you know, my father, I think as he's gotten older, has come to appreciate many of the things that the Dutch get right. Like, I think he really appreciates the concept of gedogen, which is like turning a blind eye to a lot of, so, you know, the famous sort of Dutch tolerance, right? Like, not, it's I read there's a good book on Amsterdam called, I think, Amsterdam. I think it's by Michael Shorto. But he talks about how gedogen isn't really tolerance. It's not actually about tolerance at all. It's about not giving a shit about a lot of things. Like, we don't, you know, okay, fine, you go fuck a prostitute. Like, that's fine, go do that, right? Like,
kind of keeping your nose out of other people's business.
Yeah, it's like, we're not going to worry about that. And it's deliberately, gedogen means turning a blind eye.
Okay.
And I think a large part of that is because, again, like the environment of the Dutch, right? You know, they went through horrible religious wars. You know, there was this clash of cultures that, you know, I mean, World War I, World War II happened, right? Like, they're the corridor. Right? It's like you have the French and the Germans traipsing back and forth and fighting stupid wars on your territory, and they fuck up your life. And at a certain point, you get real clear about, like, we're not going to care about that, and we're going to be real specific about what we care about and what we don't care about.
It almost sounds like a survival mechanism.
It is 100%.
We can't care about everything because it's going to fry our our brain, basically.
If we start worrying overly about what you call God or what religion you practice, like it is because of the melting pot that we have and all the cultures we have up against each other. We're going to be in another one of those 80-year religious wars. And we all fucking die and we all lose. So let's just...
What did you call this concept?
Gedogen.
It reminds, or it sounds like an inverse of some, you know, this American tendency to care about everything.
Oh yeah, it is the exact
to care about
opposite.
Everything and to express loudly your opinion about everything.
Yep, and that you have a responsibility as an American to have an opinion about everything.
Do something, say something.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's actually something. That's something my family talked about recently, but also just it's brought up in Norway generally, or with regular intervals. Is in Norway, if you're a public person, if you're a politician, it's okay to say, I don't know, or I don't have an opinion on that. In the United States, if you're a public figure of any sort, especially a politician, it's unacceptable to say, I don't have an opinion on that. You have to have an opinion on everything, it seems.
Which is also why the politicians are ultimately set up to fail, because the problem is that no individual is smart enough to really have an opinion on everything.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
Like I think there's some story about Hillary Clinton being asked what her favorite ice cream flavor is.
Yeah,
and she says, oh, I love them all.
Yeah.
In Norway, if you ask the Prime Minister, Aaaand Solberg, what she has, she's like, I don't have time for that. I don't care. I'm the Prime Minister and I'm busy. Leave me alone.
Oh.
Yeah. But I love cookie dough.
Exactly.
But I mean, it is.
If you've seen Aaaand Solberg, she definitely does.
She loves cookie dough. Actually, I will say,
sorry.
Bergen has, like, I had the soft serve in Bergen because somebody was like, you know, you always get weird tourist recommendations where somebody had like one singular experience when they were in a place and then they're like, oh, the thing you have to do when you go to this place. And so somebody was like, you have to have the soft serve ice cream. And
how was
like,
it?
It was fucking amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, like, you know, whatever you do to your cows, which I don't understand, it's really, really good.
Yeah,
dairy.
Norwegians talk about milk a lot. Like, they love their milk. Like, my friends that would go away from Norway, they would be like, oh, I really miss the milk.
Yeah.
And I was like,
I drink whole milk every day.
Really?
Fucking love it.
Yeah.
It's delicious. But that's a thinking Northern European, Scandinavian thing is we have the gene for lactose tolerance.
Well, and the Dutch too.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
And, you know, that is a really good example of culture gene coevolution, where essentially, you know, the sort of the baseline is that you lose your lactose tolerance once you get past a certain age. But everywhere you go in the world, whether you're talking about the Noor in Africa or you're talking about the Dutch and the Scandinavians, that sort of region, the people who engaged in herding, obviously that creates an environment for, now there's a huge advantage if you keep your lactase. And so in all of those places, that culture drives the increase of that gene frequency, which then drives the cultural practice, and on and on and on. Because you've now essentially access to a whole new food source. But I only know one person in Norway who's lactose intolerant.
Yeah, he carries around lactase with him if he wants to eat pizza or something.
What a fucking... Well, and pizza's huge in Norway, too.
Yeah, it is.
Isn't it?
But you poor bastard. Tavia, if you're listening to this.
Yeah. But isn't Norway the pizza consumingest nation on the planet?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, I believe it is.
Frozen pizza.
Frozen pizza.
Specifically.
I'm sorry, it's terrible.
No, it is terrible. It is. If you know good pizza,
and
it is terrible.
And they put ketchup on top.
Yep.
And party sauce.
What's party sauce?
It's kind of like Thousand Island, sorta.
Yeah. Yep.
Some kind of mayo thing.
Yeah. I just like to publicly distance myself from this. I'm not a fan of this frozen pizza.
But so I mean, in all these ways, we're just seeing again and again, right, that environment shapes culture. Environment also shapes genes, and then on top of that, because culture binds and blinds, that these cultural traits can persist for very long periods of time, and they can persist across massive migrations to other continents, and that often that those cultures aren't serving people in certain ways, right?
Sure, if you go to Minnesota, you'll find a higher percentage of people who have lactose tolerance than you do in the South. Probably.
We eat cheese like it's going out of style. Like cheese curds.
Yep. And so I think this then gets to the idea of Scandinavia as political weapon in the United States.
Yeah, that's interesting. I remember, I think it was during the most recent presidential election campaign, Marco Rubio said something about, he was giving a public jab to Bernie Sanders. He's talking about all these Scandinavian, liberal political values. And I think he would make a great president of Sweden. Zing.
And Sweden's like, he's not liberal enough.
No. Well, and also Brian and I did an interview with David Sloan Wilson.
Yep.
And of course, as David Sloan Wilson is talking about, I can't even remember what it was, but like the place that Brian went was to start talking about Sweden and how Sweden isn't a very innovative place and all of that sort of stuff. And then I brought up IKEA and Volvo and a bunch of other things.
Saab.
And Saab. And he was like, they're fucking shit. Like I would never drive a Saab or I would never drive a Volvo or whatever
They're
it
good
was.
Cars. Why not?
Yeah. But
it's just partial to Tesla.
They also make planes. Saab makes planes.
Yeah.
But
it's an acronym. It's just Swedish Aeronautics.
Is it?
Yeah. That's AAB. Svenska Aeroplan Aktiebolag. Aktiebolag means stock.
Yeah, Bolag is a company, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But so it's just interesting the way that, for conservatives in America, right? Well, it's actually, I think it probably starts with liberals, right? Look at Scandinavia.
Look at the Scandinavian model. If we want to do the right thing in America, we should import the Scandinavian liberal model into the US and everything will magically fix itself.
And so then that idea, because obviously conservatives don't want those things.
Right.
Then it becomes important to discredit Sweden and either talk about, because there's like why that wouldn't work here.
Right.
And then you hear this thing about Scandinavia being this very homogenous place.
Sure.
Or why Scandinavia isn't as great as you're making it out to be because it's not innovative. It's not whatever.
Yeah.
We're doing a different thing over here. Right. So
innovative in what sense?
Well, I think there's this idea.
We didn't make the iPhone, but we're probably way ahead of the US in terms of, fish farming practices, for example. So we're innovative in different ways.
And also you didn't make the iPhone, but there's Ericsson, which is a Swedish company.
Yep.
And then there's also Nokia, which is Finnish, which isn't really Scandinavian, but
close enough.
Close enough.
Yep.
And so, and Minecraft is Swedish. Skype is Estonian. I think.
No, Swedish too.
Skype is Swedish too.
Swedish too. Yeah.
Yeah. So the point is that some of the leading technology, Clash of Clans is from Sweden.
Yeah.
And then obviously there's also the Swedish pop music talent cluster, which gave us
God, it's huge.
ABBA, Aaaand, Max Martin.
Is Norwegian.
Aaaand is Norwegian.
Yep.
Yes.
And
Robin is Swedish.
yeah.
I think
Ace
Soap
of
is
Base.
Norwegian.
And then Max Martin wrote pretty much every pop song
Tuva, but
ever.
it's
Him and Andreas
performed by-
Carlson.
Yeah, exactly. Performed by American boy bands in the 90s and early 2000s.
Yep. And
Like Snow.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so, in
American
fact, a lot of
Swedish.
American pop culture is secretly Swedish.
Yeah.
And
it's
then
true.
there's also been all of the sort of Nordic noir that has
Nordic noir in literature and in TV and film. Yeah, there's Nordic noir, for those who don't know, it's a style of Scandinavian literature, especially Norwegian and Swedish, that kind of contrasts the horrors of crime with the, innocent, perfect setting of Scandinavian society to create a tension there. And a lot of that has been adapted into American society or American pop culture. There's this very popular Swedish crime Scandinavian noir program called The Bridge, which was made an American version of that, and
The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
the Millennium Trilogy.
Yep.
Yeah, there are lots of examples.
And then Nesbo is the big Norwegian.
UNESCO. Yeah.
So, I mean, there's, the point is that there's lots of innovation, I think, that's happening.
And the point
there.
isn't that that's equivalent to the cultural output of the United States, but to dismiss it offhand is ridiculous.
Well, and also there's 5 million Danes, I think 5 million Norwegians.
5.5 million Norwegians and 10 million Swedes.
Yeah, so it's pretty small, right? But the
Combined, we're less than the population of California.
Yeah. But there's the point is that, it's Scandinavia is this very interesting political tool for both sides in the United States. And, I think.
And it's, especially on the conservative side, it's always by people who've never really been here or know much about the culture.
Yeah. Well, but it's always a much more useful political tool to use something that you don't actually know about, because then
you can get away with it because they're talking to people who haven't been there either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not like you think that Scandinavia is perfect, right? Like clearly you had a draw to the U.S.
Sure.
Because there were things that you didn't see.
Yeah, I came to the U.S. and I lived, I was first a year in Southern California as an exchange student, then 4 years in New York for college, 2 years in the Bay Area for grad school. And the reason I keep coming back is I really appreciate the parts of American culture that lets me be more free in my personal expression and say what I want. And, I really appreciate that about American culture is the unreserved defense of the First Amendment and the culture of free expression. That's one of the reasons I like it here so much. And so, no, Scandinavia is not perfect, but, I'm sure that there are parts of Scandinavian culture that the U.S. could learn from, and then there are big parts of American culture that Scandinavians could absolutely try to incorporate.
And that clearly Scandinavians such as yourself have incorporated personally into their own lives.
And I noticed that when I go back home to Norway and Sweden and I take this American way of being in public, talking loudly and talking to strangers and being open in ways that Norwegians maybe who haven't traveled very much would look at as strange. Like I can give a practical example. Is just a few months ago, I was in the locker room at my gym in Norway, and a couple of foreign exchange students, it must have been from Southern Europe somewhere, maybe Portugal or Spain, they come into the locker room and they're talking loudly and laughing, joking, and all the native local Norwegians in the locker room are dead silent. And then one of the foreign students who are being loud and talking and having a good time, he says, "Oh, shh, we have to be quiet. We can't be loud around the Norwegians." And nobody says anything except me. And I said, "Oh, you don't have to worry. These Norwegians are not going to say anything to you, no matter what you do." And even though I called out all the Norwegians around me for not saying anything, they didn't even look at me. They didn't say anything. Because that's Norwegian culture. You don't make a scene. Don't make anything out of yourself.
Yep.
Yeah. So, but if I'd said something like that in America, people will chime in. People will
and I think
make themselves heard.
That to me, like that's also the real opportunity is to have people like yourself who can be these cultural intermediaries and, help, diffuse those situations, help get people, comfortable with, because I mean, the big problem is that, culture, and this is a thing that Reed Nicewander fucking Sonic the Hedgehog video genius star of the Jordan Peterson behind the camera. Handsome Bachelor, number one. But, you know, he shared this great thing from John Haidt, where there's the usual sort of model that people have is that it's just beliefs to actions, but that really it's much more like a pyramid of beliefs, actions, and belonging. And, you know, humans have such a deep, profound need for belonging. We want acceptance. We want part of a tribe.
That's why the worst thing you can do to somebody is just isolate them from other people. Yeah.
And the result is, I mean, that's why people stay in bad cults, because it's your community. It's your
bad belonging is better than no belonging.
That's right.
Yeah.
And, you know,
it's also reflected in like the contrast between the Norwegian prison system and the American prison system.
Yep.
Here you have no compunction about throwing people in, you know, isolation for a month, 2 months.
Years.
I think, years even. I think, you know, people probably in supermax prisons who spend all their days completely alone, but Norwegian prison system is focused on rehabilitation and learning to work in the community again and becoming a useful citizen after you get out. We don't have isolation. I mean, unless you're criminally insane and like clearly a danger to everybody around you, but still.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a book called Stranger in the Woods. And, you know, we're going to get him on the podcast, but it's about this guy who went off into the woods to live on his own for decades at a time. And just
Ted
like,
Kaczynski?
No, not Ted Kaczynski, but, you know, just like, I mean, it's so embedded in us that like, it was very unhealthy for him.
Yeah.
And when he then tried to readjust, it was very difficult for him because we are such inherently social creatures.
Yeah.
But, you know, I mean, so much of it is that it's all high school on like a global level. Like people go along with sort of bad cliques.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Because they are like so afraid of isolation and being called out. And, you know, in high school.
That's why rootless, disenfranchised young men will join gangs and criminal organizations, because it's better to have some tribe than no one.
Well, you talked as well, you know, I think it was your cousin, right, who started hanging out with people who were doing drugs, and like so much of it was because they didn't judge him and they would accept him.
Yeah. Well, my cousin went to jail on and off for a while, and when he came out, like he was different than everybody else, and the people that didn't care were the drug addicts, and so then he had to eventually get away from them so that he would get sober as well.
Yeah.
But that was part of the draw for him, was to
have a community.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I had this great conversation with, I say it's so funny. Like I say, it was a great conversation. It was literally about 3 lines of an email, but I had this great conversation with Scott Tran. But like 3 lines from Scott Tran is like better than most conversations that I have with most people. So, but he was
Thanks
just
so much.
No, I was not directing this at anyone. I'm sorry for.
We're exempt.
Oh Jesus! I just violated Janteloven. But now I'm just gonna brush my teeth on a train platform. But anyway, he was just talking because, you know, Scott has spent so much time studying, you know, ISIS and all of that, and then you know, he wrote this great article about how ISIS and the alt-right are very much the same, in the sense that they provide rootless young men mostly with a sense of belonging, a sense of historical mission, a sense of purpose, a sense of, you know, being in a great cause and all of that.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was like, okay, because clearly whatever their playbook is, it's working at building a movement. So what do we need to do in order to learn from them and then apply it to a more socially constructive movement? And he said, peer-to-peer engagement, intimate and sustained, is the key.
Yeah.
And so, the real key is that, you know, that's what it takes. It really takes like building a community, reaching out to people, and that's what it's going to take to help get people comfortable. You know, you have a sense of belonging,
right?
Like you're good, like we accept you. And then now you can have the freedom and the space to start to question your own culture, question your own values. Oh my God, star appearance by Reed Nicewander. Very exciting.
Oh, sorry. Well, I was just going to say, to talk about the idea of like why we can't just be Sweden or Norway, like the prison system.
Yeah.
Whose prison system is working better? Clearly Norway's.
But see, that,
Are you comparing to the U.S.?
Recidivism. Yes.
yeah. Well, and also just how many people are incarcerated.
Yeah.
Right.
What are the sort of things? But the point is that right there, like, and I would agree with that assessment, right?
Yeah.
But right there, what happens is that now for a lot of people, right, people get defensive about their culture. So now I get threatened. I feel emotionally uncomfortable, and now I'm going to try and rationalize why that wouldn't work here.
But
Right.
I wasn't
Yeah.
done though. But I was going to say it wouldn't work here. So who were we talking about? Well, not yet. Like we were talking about Varg
Vikanes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Imagine a whole country full of that guy.
Yeah.
So he's the black metal, explain.
Right. So for anybody who is not intimately familiar with the early heavy metal or black metal music scene in Norway in the 80s and 90s, Varg Vikanes, he was a very influential black metal musician, but he's notorious for murder and arson, basically. So he burnt 3 priceless historical stave churches to the ground and also stabbed a guy to death.
And
rival fellow musician.
Is a stave church made of wood?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was like 800 years old, and he just set it ablaze.
Yeah. But anyways, my point was that he obviously didn't have that cultural intuition that most Norwegians have. Like, this belongs to the community and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So if you come to America and you just instantly put into play a whole different system that we don't have those cultural intuitions with, you're going to have a bunch of Vargs like taking advantage of the system, and it's not going to work. And so I think that is part of the issue, where it's like one side says, if we could just do this, and the other side says, we can't do this. It's like, we just have to like figure out a new system that brings together both sides and get some new cultural intuitions.
Yeah.
Yeah, and fundamentally, I mean, I had this conversation with Adam Hansen on the phone. Like the foundation, the cornerstone of all of this for whatever society is metacognition. It's thinking about our own thinking and really reflecting on our cultural intuitions and saying, okay, guys, it's cool. We all had a mom and a dad. We all copied a bunch of things from them.
Yeah.
But now we have to like figure out, where did all that stuff come from?
I think a lot of people don't even realize that it's possible to push beyond that.
Well, that's because most people, I mean, if you look at historical experience, right, that's not something that a lot of people have done historically. And the reason why these 4 people are in this room and there are the people in the mixed martial arts community is because we've all had to do it for one reason or another.
Yeah.
Right? We, in some sense, we were in our culture, or like either you were in your culture of origin and there was something that wasn't working for you, like you.
Yeah.
Right? Or you didn't really have a culture of origin like me, because I'm like,
You grow up everywhere.
I grew up everywhere, and then my mom was doing this thing and my dad was doing this other thing, and then the surrounding population was doing a totally other thing.
Right.
So I was like, what the where do I find belonging? Like, am I supposed to like try and belong with the Greeks or the Dutch or the Americans, like, or the Brazilians or
The Saudis?
The Saudis?
I'm so glad you didn't join ISIS.
Well, you know, there was a moment where I did flirt with them, but then, you know, they also had a problem with teeth brushing on train platforms, and I was like, dental hygiene comes first, guys.
Yeah. But
so-
Cate, did you? Was there any? What was the main motivating factor for you to emigrate from Minnesota and stay in Norway for 3 years?
I mean, I was looking at that time in my life. I didn't know where to go or what to do. And when I went to visit a friend who had like a community of friends, and like people will say that Scandinavians are cold, which is sometimes true.
It's true. It's true.
When you don't know them, they're cold to strangers.
Yep.
But as soon as you're friends with them, it's like you're friends for life.
Yeah.
And they
very much the same as the Brits.
Yeah. And
it
because
can be hard to break through that initial shell.
Yeah, but I was like indoctrinated into this clique right away. And so I had friends, and it was really lovely. And like I said, the lower level of anxiety and just like seemed like such a great time. Plus I was on vacation, so it seemed doubly amazing.
Sure.
But so I was like, I'll go there. Like it just seemed like a utopia, basically. After living there for a while, it was not a utopia. but
instead
it was
of joining
lovely.
ISIS, you joined NISIS.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Oh God.
But in general, I mean, I think that's the thing. It's easy to sort of talk about like rootless young men or whatever joining the alt-right or joining the ISIS, but like for a lot of people, there's a dissatisfaction with their culture of origin, and then you run off somewhere else.
Yeah.
Like my father ran the fuck away from communitarian Holland, and then what was the thing he gravitated towards? Milton Friedman and University of Chicago School of Business, right? Which is like the most individualistic, right?
Yeah.
Like that was the thing that was the most exotic or the most different for a Dutch guy. But, you know, there's still also that appreciation of trade. So there is like a common value there. But, you know, that was his ISIS. Like I ran away and, you know, and comparatively it is NISIS, right? But, you know, I ran away and joined like science and academia because for me, that was what was missing in my life was some sort of certainty or clarity. And I thought science had that, right? So for me, it was CISIS, right? Or whatever it is.
It's a good one.
Yeah, but but you know, there are whatever thing is missing from your home environment, right? For you, it sounds like it was about standing out and being able to like
having the freedom to kind of express yourself more without feeling like you're being judged for it.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of the concept of janteloven in Norway. It's like this quiet judgment of others who try to make something of themselves. I would say that it's more embedded in older generations of people in Norway. It's becoming a little bit watered down with the younger generations because they have the ability to travel more, and they do. So they get to see more of the world at an early age and are exposed to different cultures, and they, you know, kind of filters out into society that way. But it's still there, even if you're, you know, 60-year-old Norwegian or a 15-year-old who's been on vacation to Spain and to the U.S. and Thailand or whatever. But yeah, it was this. I wanted to get away from, or at least for a while, to get away from feeling like I was being judged just for trying to express my opinions and not try to censor the way that I express myself. Yeah, not feeling like I have to be shoehorned into the mold that was already made by Norwegian society.
And so then you look around the world and there are all these cultures laid before you. And then there's this one culture,
the United States,
that is like, that is where I can find that thing.
I wasn't conscious of it at the time, but you know, it's almost like the polar opposite. Here, that is encouraged to express yourself in the most individualistic way possible. And while I appreciate that, you know, it has its drawbacks too, I think, because it almost puts, or it can be sort of dismissive towards this sense of community that's fostered in Norway. So that's a positive thing of janteloven. It fosters a sense of community and doing for the community before you do something for yourself.
Right.
To consider others instead of just yourself. And here in the United States, while you have this encouragement of individualistic self-expression, it also, at least to me, seems to encourage, to some degree, a lot of selfishness. I don't know if that would be the right word, but
no, it is.
Screw other people. I'm going to think about myself. I'm going to worry about me. I'm going to do me, and everybody else can go fuck themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what individualism is, right?
Yeah.
Like you may, as an individual, then choose to like sometimes be like, okay, now I'm going to put on my community focused hat and go do whatever I'm going to do.
Yeah.
But like, you know, across the course of their day, right? Americans spend a lot more time thinking about themselves than Scandinavians do.
Yeah.
And there are, you know, I mean, you know, I don't want to disagree with the emperor too much because that is not proper fealty.
Is that heresy in size?
That is heresy. There is only one emperor, and his name is Brian Callen. But, you know, I mean, I don't like, you know, figuring out what is the relative innovation of society, but there, and this is something I actually struggle to figure out, which is that, you know, if, for example, if you look at like really holistic cultures, like, you know, China or whatever it is, or Japan, you know, there are these expressions of like the nail that sticks up gets hammered down as a Japanese thing. And then the, you know, in China, the loudest duck gets shot, which is, you know, so.
And then deep fried.
And then deep fried deliciously.
Hell yeah.
And served with hoisin and pancakes. And we're all really happy about it, even if the duck is not. But
thanks, China.
Thanks, China. But, you know, in environments like that, you know, I mean, that certainly makes it harder to stand out, to go against the crowd, to have some sort of innovative idea.
Yeah, and I think it underscores the idea that it's not good to go too far in either direction. If you want to do well, you'd be well advised to strike a balance between the two. So I think, I'm 30 years old now, and I've been in the U.S. on and off since I was 15. And I'm finally starting to get a hang of what to appropriate from each culture and how to balance it out. So I'm not a complete, 100% sticking to the law of Jante in Norway and undermining my own self-expression over there, but I'm not going so far as the fringe of the American idea and to only focus on that. You got to find a certain balance. And I think, no matter which culture you draw upon, that's important, not become an extremist in either direction.
Yeah, and so essentially you're evolving your own culture.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
From these different parts.
Yeah.
And so what are, like, how do you think about when do you put on your Jante hat, and when do you put on your, fearless American individualism hat? First thing
that comes to mind is actually doing the opposite of which country I'm in. So when I'm in Norway, I try to draw more upon the American cultural aspects and try to push that onto my Norwegian friends and strangers that I meet. And, I'll shake the hand of the guy who works behind the store counter just because I want him to think about that. It's okay to talk to and be nice to strangers. Norwegians tend to not even acknowledge strangers. Here in the United States, if you walk onto an elevator, you'll say hi to the strangers in there. In Norway, you'll avoid eye contact.
Yep.
So if I'm in Norway, I will draw upon the American cultural ideas, and then in the US, I'll start showing more off of the Norwegian and Scandinavian cultural ideas. It's interesting. My friends in the United States will describe me as very stoic and quiet and Scandinavian and reserved and cold. But then when I go back home to Norway, my Norwegian friends tell me that I've become way too American.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the thing is that suddenly you don't quite fit in, right? Like in either place.
Yeah.
And so then the question is, how do you find that belonging in community? And do you find that, like, has having all these cultures rub off on you affected your ability to belong as easily anywhere?
Yeah, because it has led to me making friends with people who live in all different parts of the world.
Yeah.
So my best friends, they live in Seattle and Albuquerque and Norway and New York and South Africa and Thailand, and they're all over. So a lot of my Norwegian cohorts a lot of them would probably say that their group of best friends is in their local area, in their town or city. I would say that my very best friends, they're spread out all over. So I don't have, in the same way, I feel like I don't have a group of friends that I can go to in the same way, just because I've traveled and a lot and lived in different places. And the people that I most relate to are the people who have this similar kind of scattered cultural upbringing in a way. And I relate to those people, but then the drawback is they don't live where you live. They're also scattered everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's my childhood. And you can
cry, Hunter. It's okay.
Well, I probably will. Yeah. But that's also because I'll just be thinking about Brian. That, the great thing is that any religious figure, like, you can be inspired and uplifted by Jesus, but you can also be sad that he suffered so much on the cross for us. So
is he paying you to say this?
Yeah, no, that's the weird part. I'm just so infused with the spirit of Brian that he's the funniest. But I mean, that is certainly my experience, and one of the things that has been rewarding for me with mixed metal arts is that it is really a community of people who have had that same experience, and therefore
that's one of the reasons I was attracted to it. Now I have like-minded people, and I don't need to be in the same room. Yeah, I'm here now, but we could have recorded this podcast even if I was in Norway, and I can communicate with everybody through the Facebook group and the website, and we can set up things and collaborate and make projects out of it, and we don't have to be in the same country.
Yeah, and that also, anywhere you go in the world, there's a plug and play community that you can potentially connect up with.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And I mean, it's early days yet, but like, that's the real potential. And I think also part of what's going to be fun is that, the people in this community are all these weird, fascinating, interesting combinations, right? Like, this is the group that made sense to pull together for this conversation, because obviously, you know, a lot of it is the sort of the dialogue between these two cultures of Scandinavia and America, and you guys have had those experiences.
Yeah.
But like, you know, Reed has this experience of Appalachia, and then also this experience of the new atheist culture, and then the experience of YouTube and, you know, video making and film and all sorts of other things. And there's all sorts of secrets in Reed. We don't know what they are, but like
it's like a piñata.
He's a matryoshka. He's one of those Russian nesting dolls. And we've really only taken off like the first layer. Yeah. And then, you know, further in there will be a little doll of Lenin. It's going to be amazing. The inner Reed.
I feel like we're getting off track.
Yeah, we are getting off track. But the point is that there are all sorts of interesting, I mean, we're all the products of idea sex, right? Between different cultures. Yeah. And there are all sorts of interesting combinations. And I think that part of what's exciting is that when you offer people, you know, that sense of belonging. Yeah. That is not contingent upon you adhering to a particular ideology, or is not contingent upon you like going along with whatever culture we're in, because we're not as worried about survival and, you know, like not dying in the Scandinavian winter, or because the polders are going to flood Holland or whatever it is. Yeah. That you have the opportunity to explore and pick up from all sorts of different cultures. So, for example, I'm very excited to culturally appropriate, you know, Norwegian salt licorice, which Martin brought for me. So, thank you so much.
You might be on your own with that one.
No, but it's actually like, this is funny. This is also a Dutch thing. Like the salt licorice thing is super Dutch as fuck. Yeah. And people who don't appreciate it, infidels. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's the thing, is really like, it's, that's, you know, I can't thank you enough for writing that Culture Matters piece.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. And just if anybody or anyone who is listening to this and you feel like maybe you should write one too, I would encourage you to. It's not hard. Shouldn't take you long. Collectively, it took me about half a day to write it, you know, with a little bit of research and editing and stuff. Back and forth with Hunter about titling it and formatting it to the website. And that was it. And how many do we have now?
We have 4, but I think so much of it is at that point, it's a pattern. Yeah. And, you know, are there... and I mean, you know, I say we have 4. In practice, we actually have more than 4.
Right.
Because
we have 4 that are specifically under the Culture Matters.
Yeah, well,
banner.
And that are nation-based. I mean, part of what I've been thinking about is essentially honor versus dignity culture. Sure. That's a Culture Matters. It just doesn't fit within the nation. Optimism versus pessimism. That's a Culture Matters. It's just much more regional than national. Yeah. Middleman minorities is a Culture Matter.
But yeah, so anybody who's listening out there, anybody in the MMA community, if you feel like you should write this, but you're not sure, do it anyway.
Yeah.
And do you have a degree in like Norwegian studies? And
No, I did all my higher education in the United States.
Oh.
Yeah, so I have a bachelor's degree in film production from Pace University in New York, and then a master's degree in journalism from UC Berkeley.
So you just cobbled this piece together based on personal experience and reading?
Yep. Doesn't take much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I think the other thing too, like having talked to some people who have done, you know, some of them have written, you know, things that will be enshrined and inscribed in basalt, like Martin, but even people who have done sort of the much more informal sort of cultural confessions version, it becomes very helpful to write about that and reflect on that, and then make sense of your own experience.
And you don't have to be a pro writer to do it.
Nope. In fact, it's probably better if you're not.
Yeah.
Because then you'll have the freedom to just like try and make it clear.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's also like, for me, I mean, just even reading those pieces, like it was super fun because, you know, I think always what's, you know, like the more you see these patterns laid out in all these different cultures, the more, like, it was really after reading your piece that I was like, oh, fuck, this is like Asia. A lot of those sort of Chinese Confucian cultures, there's a lot of those similar patterns. Yeah. And it was really only in this conversation that I made the connection to my dad. Yeah. And, you know, the Dutch culture, even though it's about a different environmental threat. Like for the Dutch, it's really about the polders and flooding. But, you know, as opposed to just the...
Or Germany just stomping its way across your...
Yeah, that too.
But territory.
Which also happened to Norway.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. It's true.
Yep. But
that especially inspired a very like tight-knit sense of community because now they had an outside enemy to fight against during World War II.
Which is a universal psychological feature. Some sort of external threat pulls people together.
Absolutely.
Both Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton have talked about how an alien invasion would get humanity to get over its differences.
Or just the threat of an asteroid or a meteor impact.
Yep.
Now
Zombies.
we have something to fight again.
Yeah. So, and the one thing that I'll throw out there as well is in terms of, these two different mindsets, that there's actually a book called The Loudest Duck. Mm-hmm. And when you look at a lot of that research on atomism and holism, it seems like these are two evolved mindsets, and that essentially, like standing out is really for crises, right? If there's a fire, we don't want to like have consensus building and we're all going to talk everything out. Like someone needs to jump up, take charge, stand out, and it's like, you're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing this.
Yeah.
And then for sort of much, sort of larger, more complex decisions, we have to sort of talk around it and build consensus, because there it's not just about reaching the solution. It's also about reaching a solution that we can all feel comfortable with and buy in on. Mm-hmm. And so that's the wisdom to know the difference. Yeah. Like we all have these mindsets and we're all going to have to cobble together what is that playbook so we can get better at being intentional about when do you do one and when do you do the other. Yeah. And whether you draw your inspiration from Asian cultures or from Scandinavian cultures or from America or from wherever, for all these different parts, our job is really to help you figure out what your culture is. What's the culture that's going to help you succeed in the 21st century?
Boom.
Boom.
There it is.
All right. Thanks so much, ladies and gents. Thank you, Martin Totland.
Talk for a dog. Thank you for having me.
Tusen talk.
Yeah.
And thank you very much, Cate Fogarty. And of course, thank you, Reed Nicewonder. I'm so glad you made a brief appearance on camera. And ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for watching. And, we hope that you'll get involved. And, as Martin says, it's a super simple thing for him to take half a day to sort of break down his culture, but it might be really, really helpful to someone out there.
I will even offer this at the end here. If you're thinking about writing a Culture Matters or cultural confession piece, find me on the MMA Facebook page and I'll help you edit it if you need it.
That's awesome.
Let me put my journalism background to good use.
Yep. So there you go. You have the opportunity to talk to a bona fide Viking. And thanks so much, ladies and gents. And yeah, you can find us on the MMA Facebook page. Mm-hmm. You can also find us on Twitter. You can find us on YouTube. And there's what, Telegram?
Instagram.
Oh, Instagram. Yeah, there's the Instagram. There's Patreon, and then there's a Tumblr account, but I don't know that we've done anything with that yet. You could be the person who takes our Tumblr or our Pinterest through the roof. All right. Thanks so much, guys. Take care.